Hi, this is Hal Eisner, and you're listening to TV Confidential.
Robertson welcoming you back to TV Confidential, radio talk show about television. Very happy to welcome Emmy Award-winning and other award-winning broadcast journalist Hal Eisner. In the course of his 58-year career as a broadcast news reporter, first in radio, then in television, including 43 years covering news in Los Angeles, Hal Eisner not only became synonymous with getting the story and getting it right, but covering the news in a style that emphasized his calm, compassionate demeanor while embracing community-focused journalism. Our listeners in Los Angeles have grown very attached to Hal Eisner over the years, whether he was covering a major breaking news story or something more lighthearted. But if you're listening to us in other parts of the country, folks, you'll be interested in Hal's story too, not only because of the many celebrities and other major newsmakers Hal has interviewed over the years, which include Jimmy Stewart, Milton Berle, Gene Kelly, George Clooney, Dick Van Dyke, and Ed Asner, but because Hal's 58-year journey in broadcasting was very much an accident. Hal talks about that and more in a new memoir, which we'll tell you more about in just a second. Hal Eisner, welcome to TV Confidential.
You know, it's awfully good to be here. I really appreciate it. That was quite a nicely explained introduction.
Thank you. I get some flack from that from my guests sometimes, but I do it that way because I want to give the listeners a picture of who you are as much as possible so that we can spend the bulk of our time together talking about why you're here.
I think it does exactly what you want it to do.
I have about 3 or 4 takeaways from your book, the name of which, by the way, is An Accidental Career, and you can find it wherever books are sold through Palmetto Publishing as well as Amazon.com. I have like 3 or 4 takeaways from your book, one of which is you really do walk the walk. And what I mean by that is when you say at the beginning of your book, Hal, this book is as much about the people behind the stories as anything else, you aren't kidding. I mean, this is your book. This is your memoir, and yet you spend more than half of it talking about the various people that were either parts of the story that you covered one way or another, or who helped you along the way and made your career what it was.
Well, that's because I believe in that old saying, it takes a village.
Yep.
I mean, none of us do anything in a vacuum. I'm not sure about your career, but people open doors for me. And if it hadn't been for people opening doors for me, I wouldn't have gotten through to the other side and gotten along my merry way on my career. So I think it's important to recognize the fact that there are other people in your career, in your circle, in your universe, and the significance of them, whether they're people you've interviewed or people who have helped you do those interviews. And that's why. I mean, I love people. I think that's the beauty of broadcasting and being a street reporter, is you come into the lives of so many people you never knew the day before. And because of that, you know, you're enriched in so many ways, and those some days saddened, other days it just lifts you up.
And this is a point you talk about several times throughout the pages of An Accidental Career, Hal. Your ability to schmooze, your ability to, connect with people, whether it's in the face of tragedy or whether it's on the red carpet or whether it's in the course of whatever you're asked to do in the course of any given day. Your ability to engage people in simple conversation and because you have a reporter's ear, your ability to listen. You may have 1 or 2 talking points that you want to start with, but what the people tell you in the course of your talking to them, that will help shape the story you're going to tell.
Well, I'm a believer in organic reporting and organic interviewing. I don't go into an interview with a list of questions. I go into it with a couple of thoughts of things I need to talk about. But, when somebody says something to you, if you're listening to them, that may elicit the next question. So if you go with a list, you're likely not going to hear what they're saying. So I always like to start off with something fairly simple, but maybe to the point, and listen to what they're saying, and then build my interview based on their answers, and also injecting the things that are important about the story. But the schmoozing thing, I'm glad you picked up on that. I call that the schmoozability factor, and I think I got that from my dad. My dad was a lingerie salesman. He was a manufacturer's representative. He used to go to stores and he would sell to the buyers, and the buyers loved him, and then the buyers sold to the customers from, say, the local community. And Dad had that schmoozability thing. They just loved him for that, and I think I got that gene from him. I think that's what happened. But I think, you come into people's lives, and they may be at a ribbon cutting, or they may be at a drive-by shooting. And it may be that their kid just graduated with some kind of extraordinary circumstances, or it may be that their child was hit by a bullet. And so you come into these situations, and you somehow, you have a job to do, just like a police officer or a firefighter. You're a first responder. Actually, we are. And I think that, when you try to schmooze with people, if they recognize you from watching on TV, that's great. It really helps. But if they don't, the schmoozing really helps. And then sometimes both really help. So I think that you have to be able to connect with people. It's all about instant bonding. And, to get people to trust you, that's a big deal. And I've always been appreciative of that trust that I've gained from people in the community.
And to piggyback on that, Hal, it's not just your ability to schmooze and connect with people through simple conversation, but you're not afraid, depending on the moment, depending on the story you're covering, you're not afraid to visibly show comfort. Put your arm around the shoulder of the person you're talking to, especially if they're experiencing trauma or immediate loss or shock. Once upon a time, that was shied upon, but that is a trait that has served you well many times throughout your career, particularly here in L.A. And the listeners, or the viewers, appreciate that as well.
Well, I recognize that as being something that is a strength. And you know what? I think of a story that I covered in Houston. Hurricane Harvey had barreled through in 2017. And the reporters there were exhausted. They were working 24 hours on the air trying to keep people informed on what was going on. And so they brought in troops from other Fox stations, and I was one of those. And while I was there was a story I did on a Sunday morning. A church in the Houston area had been shredded by a tornado. And the people from the church had church services nonetheless, but they did it in folding chairs outside the wreckage of the building. And I noticed a family I thought was really great to talk to. And after the service, I approached them, I talked to them, and as I was doing the interview, I noticed that a little girl, probably about 10 or 11, maybe 12, was getting very emotional. And I kind of leaned in and I said, "You okay? You all right?" I was genuinely concerned and what was causing her to get emotional. And she put her arm around me and she put her head on my shoulder. And as she was crying, she said, "I was afraid that my parents were going to get killed by the tornado." And that really resonated with me. There are a lot of stories I've covered, but it's the moments within the story that really stick with me. And that's one I'll keep forever.
Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back.
This portion of TV Confidential is brought to us by our friends at Front Porch Realty, the community of realtors in the Northern Bay area of California that is committed to finding the solution that is best for their clients. Whether you're a first-time home buyer or looking to sell or lease your property in Northern California, call Karen Strain at 415-886-7411 or visit FrontPorchRealtyGroup.com for more information on how they can help you.
Ed Robertson, thanking you for listening to the TV Confidential podcast. If you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button so that you won't miss our next episode.
Hi, this is James Sartorius, and you're listening to TV Confidential.
Hal Eisner covered the news every day for 58 years, including 15 years at various radio stations in Texas and Louisiana, and the last 43 years of his career on television in Los Angeles, primarily as a field reporter for Fox 11, but also for KCOP Channel 13, and for a few years as a reporter for the LA bureau of CNN. Hal's memoir, An Accidental Career, is the story of a kid from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who originally wanted to be a lawyer, but who found himself bitten by the broadcast bug when he was a teenager. His book tells the story of a man who loved his job and who loved the city to which he grew inseparable, and whose success inspired him to give back to that community and help mentor the next generation of news reporters, which Hal has done for the past 25 years through his annual boot camp, Camp News. An Accidental Career by Hal Eisner, available wherever books are sold through Palmetto Publishing, as well as Amazon.com. For more on Hal, HalEisner.com. Plus, you can follow Hal pretty much everywhere on social media. You are somewhat unusual, Hal, is that when you first came to Los Angeles, you were national. You were part of the LA bureau for CNN during the early years of CNN as a network. Then you went local, meaning when your tenure at CNN was ended, rather than go to another national network, you decided to stay in Los Angeles.
Well, I got to tell you, the first feelings I had about coming to, first of all, you got to understand that when I came to LA, I had no television background. I had radio background. But the mentor, we talk about people that make a difference in your life and open doors, and we don't live in a vacuum. The person that made that happen was a man named Larry Lamont. He was my news director at a radio station in Fort Worth, Texas, and he thought I had what it took to do this job, even though I had no television experience, because we were working together at an all-news radio station. And CNN was an early attempt at an all-news television station or channel. And so, I came to LA, and it was so big. It was just so big. It was like Dallas or Houston on testosterone. It was very hard for me to get a sense of the freeways.
Yeah.
How do I get here? And where's that? And eventually what I had to do was I had to turn it into bite-sized nuggets. And this is where I work, this is where I eat, this is where I go shopping, this is where I play, and this is where I live, and just reduce it down to a small LA. But that worked. When I didn't do that, I felt like I was going to go home every day to Texas because I was just frustrated with it. But as I started to reduce it down to manageable bites, it became something that I fell in love with. And by the end of the first year, I really loved LA, and I really wanted to stay here. When CNN they took me as a person with radio but not television experience. And you have some rocky times when you're trying to make a transition from radio to TV. Radio, you're writing to the imagination. You have a fire, you say the flames are licking out from under the stairwell. But when you're in television, the picture shows that, so you don't really need to draw the same image. What you need to do is enhance the image that you see. And that took a little time. And doing stand-ups took a little time. And doing live shots took a little time. And all that stuff, was learning in the street and instead of in the classroom or somewhere else. And I feel like, that took a minute, but I did that. And then when I left CNN, I went right to the local stations because I really was liking LA. And I picked up work at 5, 11, and 13, and ultimately 11 offered me a staff job. I took that. And then I went over to Channel 13 because there was an offer over there. And then 13 eventually got bought by Channel 11, by Fox, and I came back. And so it was an interesting career of working in a couple of different places that ended up being one. And I've always felt comfortable with this operation. I feel like they treated me like family, and I felt like, sometimes it's WKRP, if anybody remembers that show.
I do, and my listeners do as well.
Do you? Okay, well, it was like a dysfunctional family sometimes at different places I worked at in my career.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? It's all about the people. It's all about the people you work with. And I really worked with an awful lot of great people over the years, and I felt like I was with a family at Fox 11, and I still feel that way. And, if I miss anything about retirement, it's the people that I worked with. That's what you miss.
I was nodding along as you were telling the story of how you first acclimated yourself to L.A. when you first came out here in '82. That is one of my favorite parts of reading An Accidental Career, Hal, because not only is that good advice to anyone when you're moving to a new city, whether it's LA or San Francisco or Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for the first time, breaking it down to small pieces as you're getting your footing. But one of the reasons why that part of the book resonated with me so much is because that's essentially what I did when I first moved to LA 15 years ago.
Well, you know what? I think that it's a wonderful way to do things. As we grow in a career, we find different ways to do different things, and we all do it differently. And I'm glad to hear that you did something very similar. Let me jump ahead 43 years to when I retired and show you another example of something you can do, which is when you retire and you've worked for many years, it's very hard to quit cold turkey.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like walking out the door and never looking back. And I don't know how you do that, but people do that every day of the week. And I felt like I couldn't. I felt like I had it in my blood. I mean, I went way past retirement age and kept working. And so I asked the management if I could do kind of a two-tier thing and retire from reporting and then keep my Sunday show for a while and then fully retire. And so on January 2nd of 2025, I retired from street reporting, which was the heavy lift of the job, but something I really loved because it put me in touch with people on the street. But I did retire on January 2nd of 2025, the 43rd anniversary of my first day on television in Los Angeles. I worked another 6 months on my Sunday show, Fox 11 News In Depth, which I dearly loved, and then I retired. And the funny part of all that, or the meaningful part to me, I ended up having 3 retirement parties because my colleagues were just so great. And so, I think that, there are ways to do things. They're not in a book. There's no book for how to retire for dummies. And there's no book for how to get into a business for dummies. But I think that if you read books like mine, you get an idea of how things happen, but in my case, it was totally accidental. It was inadvertent. You know how sometimes you have detours in the road? I thought I was going to be a lawyer, and I was planning to go to college and pre-law and then go to law school. But I entered a contest when I was in high school, and it was a contest for the high school football scores on Friday night, and I won for my school. And that's kind of why we're talking today. Because if I hadn't won that contest, I'd probably be a lawyer and working on a case in Texas somewhere. So I think that, the moral of this story is watch out for the accidents that happen, not the car crashes, but the inadvertent things that come in your way that you have to make decisions on. Take them seriously because they could really change the course of your life.
We will talk about one particular accident in just a second, but first, our guest this hour is Hal Eisner. Hal Eisner, multiple award-winning broadcast journalist who covered the news every day for 58 years, including the last 43 years on television in Los Angeles. Hal's memoir, An Accidental Career, available Palmetto Publishing, Amazon.com, other online retailers. Take a quick time out. We'll talk some more of Hal. We come back here on TV Confidential.
If you're a diabetic, we have great news. You can end the painful finger sticks with a new CGM. Plus, they may be covered by Medicare, Medicaid, or private insurance. If you use insulin or have had hypoglycemic events, you may qualify. Call US Med now to learn more.
800-432-8150. 800-432-8150. 800-432-8150. That's 800-432-8150.